We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so Joseph is down in Egypt. I'm going to rehash the story with you just for a minute. If you think about this from Joseph's perspective, he's had quite the life, right? He's dad's favorite. He is, I'm sorry, I'm already hot. And I kept it together for the sermon, but I can't do it for Sabbath school too. Joseph was dad's favorite. Joseph was a dreamer. It seemed that he wasn't just Jacob's favorite. It seemed to the other brothers that he was also God's favorite too. Now, if you want to add insult to injury to an unbeliever, then just make them think that God is paying partiality to somebody else. Have you ever thought about it from that perspective? I mean, let's be honest. Joseph's brothers were believers, were they not? They're in the household of Jacob. They sacrificed the same. That doesn't mean they didn't get into trouble like other people. I mean, they were still boys and men, and they made mistakes, and the Bible is full of treacherous mistakes that they made. Yet they still went to church every Sabbath, right? They still seem to have given their tithes and offerings because the Bible seems to insinuate that they were faithful in their sacrifices. Are you with me? So these are believers, and now all of a sudden, the God of their dad, and by the way, we need to understand that by this time, they are already praying to the God of Abraham and Isaac, their father. Okay? So this God, all of a sudden, seems to be speaking to their hated brother, Joseph. And I think that that's significant to the story. I think that that's very significant to the story because believers sometimes get really jealous of other believers. And so here they are. Their brothers getting dreams. And in the dream, it suggests that those brothers are going to bow down to Joseph. I'm going to tell you right now, I am never bowing down to that guy. Man, me either. Who does he think he is? Why is God? Maybe that dream wasn't from God. Maybe it was from the devil. I'm not sure how it went through their minds, but look at this. This thing is just sinking under the weight. Okay. I am not going to use that. And so Joseph is this young man who let me talk about Joseph for just a minute. I want to tell you right now that I don't believe when Joseph was at home with his dad that he was the humble little kid that we all think of Joseph being when he was down in Egypt. The Bible seems to insinuate that and I personally have read the books, Patriarchs and Prophets, and I tend to agree with the author. I think that Joseph rubbed it in their face a little bit that he was the favorite. In fact, go back and read it, and you will see that he pleasured in putting on the coat where everyone could see him putting on the coat. He walked around ruffling the coat so that people could see that Dad had made this for me and not for you. Okay? This is important to the story. This is imperative to the story because it helps us to understand what goes on later. When Joseph is at home, before he gets sold as a 17-year-old teenager into slavery, Joseph is not only the favored, he was royalty at home according to his dad. Are we all together on this? All right. Now he gets sold. His brothers hatch this plan. And I really like studying the brothers out on this because they have this idea that he should be sold. Simeon wants to kill him. Judah thinks they just need to sell him. Reuben actually plans to save him and set him free. Which is interesting to me because Reuben was one of the most ruthless of the brothers. Reuben was the one that disrespected his dad the most. You remember that? Reuben, the oldest, took one of his dad's wives as his own. You got Judah. Jesus comes from the line of Judah. You got Judah, and then you've got the story with Tamar. I mean, these kids of Jacob are ruffians. And they sell Joseph as a slave. And the Patriarchs and Prophets tells me that on that journey from Palestine to Egypt, this kid grew up. He became an adult. He humbled himself. And from the story pick up in Egypt, he's a totally different person. Okay, now that's important to the story because the Bible tells us that while he's doing what he's supposed to be doing in Egypt, he has humbled himself, and he is serving Potiphar appropriately. The Bible tells us that Mrs. Potiphar decides that she likes what she sees. She decides that she wants what she sees. And now, and the Bible makes it very clear, Potiphar saw through the whole thing. He knew what was going on. He knew that Joseph was blameless. But what is he going to do to preserve the integrity of his house? I mean, he's high up in the order of the Pharaoh. To preserve the integrity of his house, what does he do with Joseph? Throws him in jail. From slave to jail. And how long is Joseph in jail for a crime he doesn't commit? At least 2 years. Yeah. All right. So, while he's in jail, a couple of guys, a baker and a butler from Pharaoh's court, get thrown down there. You remember the story. They have this dream. And Pharaoh calls for Jacob to come out, and he says, what's going on? Because he needs the interpretation for the dream. That's where we pick up the story in our lesson. And we're in Genesis chapter 41 and verses 30, let's look at 33 and to 36. God gives Joseph some inspired counsel. So if you've got your Bibles, we're in Genesis chapter 41, verse 33. Now therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and let him be set over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this. Let him appoint him officers over the land to collect the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years, and let them gather all the food and all those good years of coming. Store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh. Let them keep all the food in the cities. Then that food shall be reserved for the land for the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. All right, what is Joseph saying? Pharaoh, you need to make somebody an appointed person over this. Is Joseph asking for the job? No. What is Joseph saying? Will this one hold it? Nope. Yeah. On Christ the solid rock Yeah, all right. All right. Is Joseph asking for the job? What is Joseph asking for in telling the Pharaoh this direction? What's going on? Yeah. He's giving him advice. And what does the Pharaoh do? Verse 37. Somebody want to read that for me? Verse 37? 37 and 38. A divine spirit. Does Pharaoh know who God is? Does he know who, let me rephrase that, because I agree with the answer. Does Pharaoh know who Yahweh Elohim God is? The creator God? I don't believe he does. I think, you've got to understand, in the land of Egypt, Pharaoh is a god. So he says something to the divine God. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Okay. Maybe he knows about him. I would agree with that too. Yep. Yes.
So he doesn't specifically state which God he's getting this information from. And the Egyptians worshipped many gods.
That's correct.
So he recognizes that the interpretation of the dream came from a source outside of human intelligence.
Yes.
So I think maybe you could be right that he's just looking for someone that has connection with those forces outside of human intelligence.
And this is a very uncomfortable part of this conversation. I'm going to go down this road for just a few minutes on this because I think you're 100% right. Yes, sir. Uh-huh. Yeah, it's an interesting concept. Remember when Paul gets to Mars Hill? He discovers there a marker to the unknown God. These people were so religious that they wanted to make sure they didn't miss anybody. But there was one nobody ever talked about, so let's give him credit too. Yeah, it's also interesting to me what you're saying that let's take an atheist, for example. Does an atheist believe in God? Well, they would say no, and yet the very definition of atheism is a definition by which you have to talk about a God. Think about the irony of that for just a moment. You ascribe a position of belief that there is no God, and yet there is a God that you're saying in that. Yes, sir? Theism, yeah. Well, the word theism comes from the Greek word theist, theos, which is the word for God. And if you put an alpha in front of that, it means the opposite of. So true atheism is the opposite of God. That's literally what it is. But what that means is you are defining a position against something that you say you don't believe in, and yet you're using it as a positioning point to show where you are. That's what's so staggering to me about this. Now, this is all important. Psalms chapter 82, we're not going to go there. We don't have a lot of time. But if you read Psalms 82, it talks about how God takes his seat in the council of the gods. And this should not alarm anyone, because we also know that in the book of Job, God has assembled a council, and Satan comes, and God says, where have you come from? He says, I've come from roaming to and fro on the earth. So it seems that there is this, and the reason I'm giving you that is not to say that there are other gods. What I am saying is that there are other beings who are created above humans. And you all should agree with that, because we're created a little lower than the angels. Are we all together? In the Hebrew mind of Genesis, these other divine beings, these other higher than humans, the word is used in Hebrew, Elohim. That's the word for God. They are gods. In fact, when it says, is there a divine being, it's not necessarily a reference to the God of heaven. It's just a reference. So you're 100% right. It's a reference to something. And what Pharaoh is doing is he is acknowledging that there is a greater power out there than him. Okay. Is Pharaoh's declaration reasonable? I think it is. I'm going to be critical of Adventists for just a second. I am an Adventist. I'm a lifelong Adventist. I love my church. I wouldn't be doing what I do if I didn't. So let me just give that qualification. But let me be critical of the Adventist church for just a minute. We are so cautious to embrace new ideas that we hang on to our ideas all the more tightly, and so it keeps us sometimes from being able to be open-minded enough to receive new light. Does that make sense? And I think that what we want as Adventists is to read that Pharaoh is acknowledging that this is the God of heaven. Pharaoh, this particular Pharaoh, is not the one of the Exodus, but this Pharaoh has the same inclination as the Pharaoh of the Exodus, because they're saying, well, what God is more powerful than me? Okay, there may be somebody out here that we haven't tapped into yet. We'll go along with that. But in the mind of Pharaoh, in the mind of a God, a man who is a God in his own right, who has 300 other deity gods that he worships, he is not reaching out for the divine Yahweh Elohim, the creator God. He's reaching out for a higher power. And that's one of the problems that we have in our world today, is some people stop at the higher power. And I think the other problem is that we Adventists say, oh, he was reaching out to God. No, he wasn't. But Joseph is going to lead him to God through this experience. Do you understand that difference? Okay? All right, so let's keep going. Imagine what Joseph is feeling now when Pharaoh says, I think we found the man and you're the guy. And Joseph goes from being most favored in Palestine, Canaan, to being most favored in Egypt. Do you wonder if he's thinking, oh man, here we go again. I mean, he found himself as a slave in Pharaoh's home. Not Pharaoh, Potiphar. Like Potiphar's like 3 in the nation, right? He's the commanding general of the armies. That means he's up there, right? And then he goes down to jail. And I just wonder if Joseph's not going, oh man, here we go again. Up, down, up, down. All right. Something happens. Here we go. This brings us to our lesson for today. Joseph's brothers get to Egypt. Chapter 42, verses 1 to 6. Apparently the famine wasn't just in Egypt. It's in Canaan. In fact, the Bible leads us to believe that it was across the world. You need to understand that from Moses' perspective, as he's writing the book of Genesis, anything that's being affected by this is the whole world. All right? So it could have just been Canaan and Egypt that's having a famine. Let's think about this for just a minute. Are we experiencing drought here in northwest Arkansas? No, if you were out driving at about 4 o'clock yesterday, you know that we had what we commonly call down here a gully washer, right? There was a downpour, and I was driving in it, and it was nuts. My windshield wipers were on high. I have my windshield treated so the water beads off, and I still couldn't see where I was going. All right? But while we were experiencing water here, and we did need it because we hadn't had measurable rain here for a couple of weeks, Lake Powell over in the west is 40 feet lower now than it was at the beginning of summer. I mean, they're talking about drought. There are entire lakes that are disappearing. Is the whole world being experienced? Over there, they think that the world's in drought. Over here, we're like, what drought? Does that make sense? So from Moses' perspective, he's telling us that it's the whole world. Likely it's just Canaan, Mesopotamia, and Egypt. Because the Bible says that they're coming from afar. So maybe Ethiopia, Libya, these areas surrounding Egypt. And there's this major drought. I heard one scholar actually suggest that this is how the Sahara Desert was formed, by the drought. There's no proof of that, okay? Just fascinating interest. So there's this major drought, everything dries up. People are coming from all over. Here's Joseph. He's assigning all the things to go out. You got to know that Joseph isn't the only one that's letting food go out. If he's smart enough to figure this plan out by God's help, and the text even suggests that he assigned people under him to oversee everything, then my question is how do Joseph's brothers find their way into the courtyard of Joseph? Have you ever thought about that? Okay? Yeah. So there's food down in Egypt. The text tells us that. Jacob says, hey, there's food down in Egypt. You boys go down and get it. Joseph is in the capital city most likely. There are other cities in Egypt. There's not just one city. How is it that they find their way to the capital city, number one? Number two, how is it that with all these hundreds of people coming from out of state to buy food, that the brothers of Joseph find their way to Joseph and not to one of his helpers around the way? Because nobody knew that these were Joseph's brothers. The Bible makes it clear the only one that recognizes anybody is Joseph. So how do they get in Joseph's court to buy food from Joseph? Have you ever thought about that? I have spent hours on this. Yes. 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 This is not coincidence. And that's why I had to tell you the story that I did, to get you to this moment, because this is why the story becomes imperative. This is why our whole lesson has any meaning, is this moment right here. This is a come to Jesus moment, a come to God moment for all parties involved. It's just that the brothers of Joseph don't know it yet. But Joseph sees it like this. What are these guys doing here? How come they didn't get sent over there? Joseph recognizes it. Man, they have been put here right in front of me. Now, the Bible tells me that Joseph is going to test them, but I believe that the reason why they ended up in Joseph's court is because God is testing Joseph. Have you ever thought about that? What do you think about what I just said? Let's chew on it for just a moment and spit it back out to me. What is this? Think about this situation for a moment. mean, you've been gone for a long time. Did you raise your hand? Go ahead.
Well, I think Joseph had been in the process for all these years of the Lord working on his heart, forgiving his brother.
Yeah.
And yet when they came and he saw them, I'm sure it brought up and he had to deal again, once again, with reminding himself of that forgiveness that he had given. But at the same time, he worried about his younger brother Benjamin. He worried because trust and respect had been lost with his brothers. He may have forgiven, but still there was a building of trust and respect that needed to be returned. And this piece, I think that was able to be accomplished.
Okay, good. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. There was food for everybody. That's right. They all ended up there. Yeah, I agree. Think about it. Yeah, Ann.
If you think of what you said earlier about, Joseph had some culpability in the whole
Yes.
dysfunctional family situation. He needed some healing of his own sins as well as the brothers needed healing for theirs. And
Yeah.
so I think you're right there that there is a testing of both.
Mm-hmm.
We think more of Joseph being the victim and his brothers need to ask him for forgiveness. But if he had been a little more gentle or a little more patient with God's leading, he may not have provoked them to the point of violence that it came
Yes.
to. So
Yes.
I think you're right that there was some testing that needed to be done on both sides. And as Kim said, you can think that you have forgiven and all of the pieces of the puzzle have already been taken care of. But when you're confronted with someone who has hurt you,
Yeah.
you still, those things come back to your mind and you still.
They do.
I think once forgiven does not always mean all of the parts of that damage have been restored.
Yeah.
And I think we have to keep coming back to forgiveness.
That's right. That's right. Keep coming back to it. Somebody once said, forgive and forget, which can I just say is the dumbest counsel you've ever been given in your life. Yes, forgive, but you never forget. Let's be honest. Am I right about it? Come on. A girl broke up with me in high school, my junior year, and she said, I never really liked you. I was dating you because you were popular. Might as well just stuck a knife in my heart and twisted it a few times and then yanked it out and left me on the side of the road for dead. That's how I felt as a teenager. Imagine how I felt when she came back into my life about 5 years later as a senior in college. I was engaged by that time to my wife, but she comes back into my life. I'm going to tell you right now, the first thing I thought of were those words that she had said the last time I had seen her. Now, had I forgiven her for it? Sure, I had moved on, but I still felt the pain of that moment, in that moment. The natural human response is to protect yourself, to isolate, to get. I've said this for years. I have a severe allergy to pain, physical or emotional. And so does every other human being that I've ever met. When somebody hurts us, we isolate ourselves from that person so that we don't have to experience that again. Now Joseph is being face to face with one of the greatest sources of pain that not only did he cause, but he received. And I'm going to tell you equally that when you realize that you have caused pain and you come back to it, even if you have been forgiven, when you come into that person's presence, it takes a very special person to help you move past the fact that you, because there are two, and the lesson actually gets into this. There is the emotional forgiveness that we give. That's where if you offend me and I say, hey, you say, hey, Pastor, I'm sorry, I accept your forgiveness, and we move on. But there's also the psychological forgiveness that we have a hard time giving ourselves for causing the pain in the first place. Does that make sense? So the brothers are going to deal with remorse, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. But Joseph also is dealing with remorse, and we see this, as you pointed out, in the way he deals with his brothers, specifically with how he deals with Benjamin. Why is Joseph so worried about Benjamin? Because he and Benjamin were the only two sons of Rachel. And not only was Joseph the most favored son of all of them, but Rachel was the most favored wife. So if you have a favored wife and now the oldest son isn't there, what are you going to do to the younger son? Do you see? This is so dysfunctional, it's not even funny. So we see this coming out in the way Joseph does this. And the second thing that we see is, remember when he sends the brothers back home? He says, one of you has to stay here till I see Benjamin. Which one stayed? Simeon. Why Simeon? He was the worst ringleader of the bunch that had been so torturous to him. Don't tell me Joseph has for a second forgotten how his brothers treated him. Because Joseph takes Simeon and throws him down in jail. And you can tell me if you want to, with your Adventist belief that Joseph was just testing them. You got to know, because you're a human being and I'm a human being, there was a little bit, not much, there wasn't much, but there was a little bit of retribution there. Don't believe me, go back and read Patriarchs and Prophets. Joseph picked Simeon because he hadn't forgotten. Are you with me? This is important stuff. The whole rest of the lesson doesn't matter unless we understand the grind of what's going on in this interaction. But then he does something else. He keeps Simeon in jail. He asks them to bring back his brother, and then he does one more thing. He gives them all their money back and sends it home. Okay, what do I do with that, church? What do I do with the fact that he just gave them all their money back? I mean, he threw Simeon in jail. What do we do with this? Now, this is, if my memory serves me correct, this is not the only interaction between Joseph and his brothers. There's going to be multiple interactions where they're coming and going. And the first time he sends the money home, does he send anybody after them? No, he just lets them go. And when they came back, there is definitely a test in this, because when they come back with double the money. Remember that? So Joseph sees immediately that these guys are at least honest. My wife went and got a haircut last week. And I do most of the bills at our house. We try to do them together. You know, the people that do it together are the ones that are supposed to be the strongest, and we still have a problem spending and saving and spending again. So I don't know what difference it makes. But anyway, I pay the bills, she pays the bills. So she goes and gets her haircut. You know, when I get a haircut, my wife cuts my hair so it's free. I offered to cut her hair so it would be free, and she said, no way. Yeah, she is. It'd be straight. So she gets her haircut, and the lady at the hair salon calls yesterday and says, did you mean to give me a $295 tip? And my wife goes, no. Somehow when she was punching in the numbers, she punched in a couple of extra digits, and so my very generous wife became exceptionally generous. Thank the Lord that hairstylist was honest and gave us our money back. And I told my wife, I said, you know, her honesty alone, you should give her 10% additional just for the honesty. I mean, we don't see that very often, and I want to encourage honesty every time I can, and the Lord has blessed us, so why don't we be a blessing to her? So that's what my wife did. She blessed her with a very generous tip. And we got our money back. Whew, thank you. So $295, you know how much money that is? It's crazy. So here's Joseph, and he gives them their money back, and I submit to you that Joseph giving money back, he doesn't have to do this. But he's extending to them without them knowing it, grace. He is giving to them freely from what he has received. That's what grace is, by the way. Grace is not something you deserve. Grace is something that you have to offer somebody else because they can't do it for themselves. And so we're all in the middle of all this. We've got revenge in the story. We've got genuine concern. We've got tests happening on every front. And in the middle of it, we've got grace. Do you see it? I mean, this is a convoluted story. All right, let's keep moving. Joseph, what does Joseph's reaction to his brothers? What does his reaction to his brothers reveal about God? If you want to look at a reference, Matthew 5, verses 43, 44, and 45. Joseph, his way of reacting to his brothers reveals to us something about his relationship with Jesus. What is it? Do you remember? Did you see it in the text as you were studying this week? Let's read the text. Maybe that'll help us. Somebody read for me Matthew chapter 5, verse 43, 44, and 45. Matthew 5, 43 to 45. So, what's going on here? What does this text reveal about Joseph's relationship with God? Yeah. He understands that even the people who are the worst against us, if we're going to have peace in our own lives, real control happens when we get control of our own lives. Real control happens when we empower other people to do. Can I just use our church for an example? And I think you'll resonate with me on this. Joni, I know you will, because we've kind of had the opportunity to work a little more closely over the last couple months. When I was first assigned to this church, I don't know what you all felt in the audience. I can tell you what I felt coming in. Okay? This is just open candor. I felt like, oh great, we got that guy. That's how I felt. I did not feel received. I did not feel warm. I did not feel like I was embraced by the body. I felt like, oh great. That's how it felt to me. Not that that's what you felt. Please don't misunderstand. I'm just speaking from a corporate response and reality. It was not the warmest welcome I had ever received. And I will be honest, I didn't put myself out there either because I was like, I don't know what I'm about to get. So I went into protection mode. Because normally when I get assigned to church, I get a say in it. I didn't get a say and you didn't get a say. Most of the time when a pastor comes into a district, the district works together to decide if they want this guy or not. You didn't get that say, I didn't get that say, so I felt like there was a wall between us. Now I feel like that wall is gone and there is a really good working relationship. But what had to happen first? I can tell you from my mind what it was. From my mind, it was the church had to understand pastor wasn't going to come in here and just change everything the way he wanted it. Once that was taken care of, then there was an empowerment where the church was able to say, hey, let's work together. Does that sound reasonable? Okay, I think that that's what Joseph had to learn when he left his parents' home. Here was the golden kid who had everything handed to him on a silver platter, and all of a sudden now he had to realize that instead of him receiving it, he was going to have to give it. Does that? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it seems to me that even though these tests might have originated in Joseph's mind, God was working in those tests.
No question.
Because you see the brothers say, it's all coming back on us. We're getting what we deserve. We should not have treated Joseph the way we did. And now look, this ruler in Egypt has put us in jail for 3 days, and then he jails Simeon for longer than that. But they say to themselves, we're kind of getting what we deserve.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, Joseph needed to learn some things too, because now the roles had been reversed.
Yes.
He was in the position of power over
Yes.
his brothers, where they had been in a position of power over him
Yes.
before. And God needed to know that he
Yes.
And we might look at some of those tests and say, what is he thinking? Accusing now
Yes.
Benjamin, the favorite brother,
Yes.
of being a thief. But I think there, I still don't understand how Joseph anticipated things happening. But I can just see that even in this, maybe even if there was some revenge, there was test for both Joseph and the brothers to see how they would now respond in the positions they found themselves now that the tables were turned.
I agree. I'm thinking about this as you're talking. All right, so the people who have the greatest power also have the greatest responsibility. That was in a movie, as I recall, a few years ago, and everybody has made fun of it ever since. But there is so much legitimacy in the statement: with great power comes great responsibility. Yes, I think Joseph, and as you were talking, I was thinking about, I wonder if Joseph's dreams from being a kid came back to his mind, that now all of a sudden his brothers are here. Oh my goodness, this dream has come true. And when he revealed himself to his brothers, I wonder if that dream came to their mind immediately. I know it did because I've read the story. All right, let's focus on just another aspect of the story then. Here they are. They've come back to town, and now they've got Benjamin with them. So this is at least the second interaction, and Benjamin is with them in the second interaction. And you'll remember the anguish that Jacob went through. You took my son Joseph, and now you're going to take my son Benjamin? So the Bible makes it clear that when Joseph died in Jacob's mind, Benjamin became the new favorite. And we should understand that that's the natural response, because if Joseph is gone, you're going to blame the ones responsible who should have been protecting the boy. Can you imagine Reuben as he explains to his dad what happened? And Judah and Simeon as they express, because you always spoke from oldest to youngest in those days. So Reuben goes first, and if my memory serves me correct, wasn't Simeon second, and third was Levi, and fourth was Judah. If my memory's right, I haven't studied that, and I didn't bother to make sure I had that right this week when I was studying, but I think that's right. So Reuben speaks first. Dad, sorry, Joseph's gone. Simeon has hated Joseph more than anybody else. Jacob's looking at him because he had to know. Come on, let's be honest. Our kids don't hide much from us. They hide some things, but we know when they're doing something wrong. So now Benjamin's the favorite. Here they are in Egypt, and the Bible tells me that when Joseph sees Benjamin, he weeps. He had to leave the room. He had to compose himself because he couldn't hardly stand it. So he goes out, gets himself composed. He comes back in. The brothers have got to wonder what in the world is going on, because the weeping and wailing of Joseph wasn't done in a closet. It was done in such a way that even the Egyptians thought something bad was happening. Now he sees his brother, and he doesn't reveal himself to his brothers. He just says, all right, I believe your story. Go get Simeon out of the prison. You guys can go on home. By the way, he says to his cupbearer, put all their money back in their sacks. Now he's putting the money from 2 trips in, right? Give them all their money back. They had brought the money from the first trip back. And then he says, oh, by the way, take my golden chalice and put it in the youngest one's bag. So they leave. They figure this out. They come back. Oh, by the way, there's a banquet in the meantime. How wonderful is it that Joseph seats the brothers in perfect age order? One scholar suggests that even though Joseph was sitting at the head of the table, he had arranged it so that the perfect birth order was so that as they came around the table, there he was in the right spot, which means that to the spot at the left of the table would have, instead of been Reuben, it would have been his younger brother Benjamin. Now, I don't know if that's how it was. I'm just telling you how one scholar visualizes it. And I'm partially inclined to agree, because Joseph is trying to say somehow that, hey, I know more than you guys think I do. Remember, in Egyptian lore, Joseph is now a deity as well. And the Hebrew boys, even though they don't accept the Egyptian gods, understand and are going to be respectful of this. And so they're going, what in the world? The text tells me that they marveled at this, which is a way of saying they were trying to figure out and make sense of it. Is this guy a god? Is this guy God, the God that my dad prays to? How did he know this? They're sitting here trying to figure it out. And the best part of the story to me is that Joseph has mastered Egyptian, and it wouldn't matter if he had mastered it or not at this point, because the brothers wouldn't know. They're talking through an interpreter, and Joseph understands everything they're saying. How cool is that? And then in great tears he says, I'm Joseph, I'm your brother. And what is the first thing the brothers are afraid of? Revenge, death. Yeah. He's going to kill us. He has been messing with us. What are the lessons of the story? The time is just going by way fast. I need 30 more minutes. But remember, the point of our lesson today is all about forgiveness. That is what we're driving to. Don't lose sight of that. Some of you are sitting there going, oh, you're not in your lesson. Yes, I am. What is going through the boys' minds as they're listening to Joseph say, I'm your brother? Imagine that flood of emotions. Chew on that for just a moment. Have you seen somebody that you hadn't seen in years and years and years? You get reacquainted with them? One of the first people I ever baptized in my ministry, in fact, he was the fourth person I ever baptized in my ministry, is now a Seventh-day Adventist minister. So cool. And his sister is a member of my church in Springdale. Crazy how those things come back around. This kid would not let me baptize him. I worked with that kid all summer long, pleading, begging for him to be baptized. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. Finally, one day I said, you're right. You're not. He goes, what? You're not. That's why we get baptized. Jesus is good enough. You're not. And he let me baptize him. Fast forward 20 years, I'm back in Arkansas pastoring, and he calls me up. He goes, man, let me tell you the rest of the story. So emotions flood in. I'm going to tell you another bad story. When I was a third grader, there was this girl in my class. I will not tell you her name, even though I can tell you both of her first and last names. I've never forgotten her. I was cruel to her. Called her names. I was mean. I was very not nice. In fact, if they held our youth against us, they wouldn't let me be a pastor. I was so mean to that girl. It's just brutal. And I ran into her in college, from the third grade to college. What is that, 12 years, something like that? 10 years at least. And I didn't run into her face to face. I ran it. This is in the early days when messaging is first coming out online. You know, this is before Facebook. This is before MySpace. This is just email messages. And I found her online. She was going to school at Southern. I was going to school at Southwestern. And so I sent her a message and I said, "Hey," and I wrote her name. It's Ben Orion from San Antonio. Do you remember me? Long pause. In fact, I wondered about the connection, if the digital had given out. And she said, finally, "Yes, I remember you. How are you doing?" And she finally wrote back. I mean, I'm talking about 20, 30-second pauses. These are not immediate responses. These are drawn-out responses. She goes, "All of a sudden, I'm in an emotional whirlwind." And it flooded back to me how I had treated her. And so I immediately wrote to her and I said, "Look, since I found you, I need you to know I'm not that guy anymore. I follow Jesus now. I love the Lord, and I am so sorry for how I treated you." And she wrote back almost instantly, "Glad to hear, but I'm not sure I can forgive you." And she never responded to me again. I closed it. I apologized. So here's Joseph in the room with his brothers. "I am Joseph. I am your brother." You have to know that the flood of emotions on both sides erupted, because the Bible tells us about Joseph's flood. Joseph is weeping. He falls on his brother and he's weeping. Joseph addresses them now in their native Hebrew. "I'm Joseph." "What? How's he speaking English or Hebrew? What's going on?" And the brothers, The brothers crowd around, and there's all these questions. What? We thought you were dead. What happened? All right. So Joseph demonstrates this idea of moral guilt and psychological guilt, emotional guilt, psychological guilt. The brothers, the story reveals, these tests reveal a couple of things. Number one, with the brothers, it reveals that instead of being jealous of their little brother Benjamin, for the sake of their father, they became overprotective of their little brother Benjamin. From the standpoint of, they were even willing to put Simeon in jail to protect their father. Simeon was the gruffest and cruelest of the bunch, and he was willing himself to humble himself to go to jail. He didn't have to. By the way, you all need to understand that whole scenario was voluntary. Think about the stupidity of the moment. If I'm a brother and I have not humbled myself, I'm thinking to myself, man, I can go to a different city and get grain. I've got servants that I can send in to get grain. I don't have to do this myself. But because they had humbled themselves, they kept coming back, and they kept doing what they were being asked to do. Why? Because now all of a sudden, in the later stages of their lives, they are honest men. They are honorable men. Don't let that come out be missed in the text. For all of the horrible things that these guys have done, these guys are upright, honest men at this point, at least as pertains to their household. So Simeon volunteers to stay in jail. And by the way, he knows that when he goes into jail, they're going back. It's going to take him a couple of weeks to get home. This is not an overnight stay. They also know that they're going to not come back until they're almost out of grain again. So this is going to be a period of time. They're taking grain that's going to last them for a period of time, perhaps months. Simeon's going into jail. He does not know what he's going to encounter in jail. This is crazy. They come back with Benjamin. That was the second trip. There's one more round trip. Remember, the third trip was with father, Jacob. Forgiveness. Did the brothers accept Joseph's forgiveness? Think carefully before you answer that. Did the brothers accept the forgiveness that Joseph offered them? They're in that room. They're hugging each other. They haven't seen each other in 20 or 30 years, however long it was at that point. 35 years, I think, is what it was at that point. Did the brothers accept the forgiveness of Joseph? What does the Bible tell us? Yeah.
I think it was also a process because later when their father died again, they feared Joseph's retribution or revenge. So again, the whole thing as far as relationship was a day-to-day process of them working through this. It wasn't just...
They recognized in the moment in the courtyard that he could have had them axed immediately. So now there's humility. But now as time passes and they're getting the royal treatment, as it were, and they're not being killed, they're going, what's going on here? Is he angling? Is he trying to set us up? What's going on here? And you're 100% right. That's where I was going to go with it. The Bible makes it explicitly clear that when Jacob finally dies down in the land of Egypt, brothers are still alive, and they come back to Joseph, because Joseph is still numero dos. He is number 2 in the kingdom. The only one more powerful in Egypt than Joseph is Pharaoh. They come back to Joseph, and they go, hey, man, Dad's dead. Are you still going to be nice to us? And what does Joseph say? Of course I am. I'm providing for you better than anybody else. The Hebrews are getting better treatment than the Egyptians. Talk about coming full circle. Why do you think the Egyptians started hating the Hebrews? Because the Hebrews had it better in a foreign land than the natives did. Which means that old habits die hard. Like father, like son. Joseph had a little preference to his family. So that brings me back to where we started. And the point of the whole lesson is what forgiveness can do for restless hearts. What does forgiveness do for us when we forgive other people? Gives relief, it gives healing. There's peace. When did Jesus forgive us? Jesus forgave us before we sinned, didn't we? Didn't he? Yeah. And if I agree with Ellen White, and I do on this, he made that decision before Adam and Eve sinned. The decision to die in case a created being fell was made. Let me rephrase that. I don't know that it was a decision to die. What it was is that the Pen of Inspiration says that there was a decision that was made that if a created being fell in rebellion against God, that there was a plan to redeem them back. So what that plan was, we don't actually know. And the reason I submit that to you is because if you continue on from the Pen of Inspiration, she makes the statement that after Adam and Eve fell in the Garden of Eden, that Jesus the Son went to the Father 3 times begging him to let him be the one to fulfill the redemption for fallen man. That twice the Father in heaven said, I'm not letting you die for them. Now, let that sit on that for just a moment. That even the Father, Creator God of the universe, the all-powerful being of everything that you can imagine, who thinks and it is, paused when it came to giving up his Son. That's what Ellen White says. And yet he did it. And that decision was made right there. Now, what do you think it did for God to forgive? What do you think it does for God to forgive? Have you thought about God's forgiveness? I want to submit to you that most of us probably take forgiveness for granted. You're quiet, you're chewing on that. What do you think about that? I know it's past 12, but come on, work with me here for a minute. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? Mm-hmm. There is. There's a challenge. I didn't understand forgiveness when I was a kid very well. But now that I'm a father, I kind of get it a little bit. Because my kids will make mistakes. And, you know, you've heard me tease that kids have brain damage, and my kids are loaded with it. But they're really great kids. And my daughter makes mistakes, and she'll make the same mistake over and over and over again. And she'll say, "I'm sorry, Daddy." And I want to scream at her and say, "Well, if you're sorry, then why don't you stop doing it?" But I don't say that very often because I suddenly realized that if I was truly sorry for my sins, I would stop doing that too, but I can't. I just can't. I want to. I resonate with what Paul says in Romans 7, the good that I want to do, I do not do, but the evil I don't want to do, I do. I mean, if you read that, carefully and slowly, it sounds like he's making a run-on sentence, but what he's really doing is he's describing the anguish of the human mind to do what's right. And I think that's what Joseph is dealing with here. Joseph is dealing with the anguish of the human mind to do what's right. He knows he can have these locked up, but somehow, somewhere along the way, the desire for unity overpowered the desire for revenge. He was reunited. And even though his brothers did not fully trust him, which is evidenced in our lesson, Thursday brings it out very loud and clear that the brothers are scared to death that he's going to destroy them. Joseph says, look, I just wanted us to be all together here. I just want us to be all together here. Forgiveness, true forgiveness, is the power to release the other person from emotional and psychological debt that they are carrying because of the pain that they have caused. Now, whether or not they release it or not is up to them. You have given them the empowerment, and that's why I talked about empowerment just a moment ago. The real power in the relationship is not from the person who says, I'm sorry. The real power is from the person who says, I forgive. And I'll never forget, I'll leave you with this. I don't know, I was 13 or 14 years old, and I had been taught what I just shared with you in school, and so I thought, man, and I had gotten in trouble. My dad believed in the laying on of hands. Y'all aren't even hearing me. And they don't let us do that anymore. They say it psychologically damages our kids, and I was psychologically beat up all over the house, you know. And no, my dad was good to me, but I knew that there was a Belton that was about to happen. And so my dad told me to go to my room and to prepare for what was coming. Don't you hate that? Man, go prepare for your beating. And so I went into my room and I was preparing. I was putting on extra underwear and grabbing a hand towel and stuffing it in my pants. Yeah, like he can't figure out that his deformed kid is ready. And he came and he said, I said, Dad, I forgive you for what you're about to do. No, I still got whooped, but he did it smiling and laughing. I mean, how can you not laugh through that? And so I still got my lesson. But I tried it one other time. I got stopped by a cop for speeding, and I legitimately deserved the ticket. And I told him, I said, hey, I forgive you for what you have to do right now. I don't hold it against you. And it did work. He said, what? I can't give you a ticket now, you know. And so he let me go with a warning because I told him I forgive him. But what it does is it releases our own psychology, our own mind. It releases our own heart to say, I forgive you. I'm not holding this against you anymore. And it allows them now to attempt to forgive themselves. And listen, there will be people who we try to ask forgiveness from, and they will not give it to us, like the friend that I mentioned a few minutes ago. But I still feel empowered and released from that because I did what was required of me. And I did it honestly, and I did it wholeheartedly. They have to deal with what they will deal with. This lesson teaches me that what Joseph does for his brothers is a visual representation of what God does for us. Did you know there is no greater parallel in all Scripture than that of the life of Joseph and that of the life of Jesus? The parallels are striking and uncanny. It's almost that the life of Jesus is a reliving and a retelling of the life of Joseph. You remember Jesus' brothers didn't like Jesus. Remember that? Yeah, go ahead. I'll finish in a minute. Go ahead. Share your thought. Yeah. That's right.
And that is what Joseph did. And I appreciate how the struggle that the brothers were going through, like how they were struggling to accept the forgiveness.
Yes, yes.
And Joseph was like, I'm going to work with you. I'm going to work through that
Yeah,
to make you feel comfortable.
yeah,
Because no matter what Joseph was doing, the brothers didn't feel good about everything they were receiving from Joseph. Because they feel like, no, you're doing more than what we deserve. We don't deserve this. At least let us keep us here. It's like the prodigal son is
yeah,
like,
yeah,
let me be one of your servants.
yeah,
So that's how the brothers did. And Joseph was like, no, you're not a servant. You're brothers. You're
yes,
not this. So
yes,
that teaches me about, like, if I say I forgive somebody, I have a responsibility. The responsibility is how do I make the person feel good, feel okay
yeah.
about that forgiveness I'm giving out.
And you bring up something on that note. Maybe we'll finish with this because the clock just hasn't stopped yet. Keep looking at it, hoping it will. Yes, in forgiving, Joseph does not let the brothers off. He does not excuse their behavior. Forgive people, we are not excusing their behavior. In truly requesting forgiveness, we should be owning the situation. Joseph makes this very clear. He said, what you did, you meant for evil. I'm going to tell you what you were trying to destroy me. But God overruled you. And since God overruled you, then I'm not going to hold it against you either. That's really the epitome of forgiveness. Since God's going to forgive you, then who am I not to? Right? That's the whole point of the parable of the unfaithful steward, right? The unfaithful debtor, he owed an impossible debt to pay. Generational wealth is what he owed, and he gets forgiven, and then he can't forgive a dude that owes him a day's wage. This is the point of that parable, and this is in the story of Joseph. And so forgiveness is truly about holding accountable the essence of the pain, of the debt, and then saying, okay, but I'm not going to make you pay it. I'm forgiving you for it. So we're not going to discount what happened, but we are going to say it's not going to matter anymore. And I think that's the point you're making very well. Yeah. Thank you all for joining with me. I hope that you gained something different and new out of this lesson after having read it. I hope that it made even more sense. And in fact, as I was going through the notes, I discovered a couple of things I hadn't seen before. So when I get home this afternoon, I'm going to jot them down so I remember them for next time. And I pray that that has been the case in your study as well. I'm not sure how you close Sabbath school, but let's at least have a word of prayer, and we'll conclude our time together this morning. Father in heaven, thank you so much for your mercies, and we thank you for the Word of God. We thank you for the example that we have, the practical example of Joseph, who demonstrates divine forgiveness. And I pray, God, in a special way, that as we go through this coming week, you'll help us to humble our own hearts, to humble our own attitudes and our own minds, that we would claim your forgiveness and that we would be equally generous and gracious in giving it as well. Forgive us of our sins, forgive us of our transactions and our transgressions, we ask. As we leave today, I pray, Father, that you'll give us a great rest of our Sabbath day. May we Sabbath in peace and in the joy of Jesus. May we look forward to the next one when it comes next week. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Have a great Sabbath afternoon, y'all.